You're listening to the Galaxy Poet Podcast, a new digital platform centered around art, the creative process, and creative solutions to problems facing our world. I am your host, Jordan Ferreira. Let's begin. Welcome to episode 16 of the Galaxy Poet Podcast. My guest today is genuinely one of the most intelligent and interesting people I know. In full disclosure, we may be related. He may be my nephew, but that's not why he's on the show. He's on the show because I think he's genuinely someone that's going to do great things, has already done great things, and is just a really, really interesting person. So I want to welcome Elijah Santos. What's going on, Elijah? How you been?
Good. With an intro like that, my head might get too big. My head might get way too big.
No, I've never had that impression from you, and I really appreciate you doing this. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
But man, there's so many things that I want to talk to you about. We've had so many interesting conversations about everything from like philosophy to politics to, man, we were just talking earlier about the Grammys.
Yep.
But yeah, you're someone that I'm really interested in talking to because often when I do talk about politics with friends, acquaintances, people that are generally kind of in the sphere and circle of friends that I have, it's typically one kind of political disposition, if that makes sense. And I really want to have, I really like this platform to be something that's more inclusive in that way, where even if it's, even if some of the conversations are things that I don't necessarily agree with, not saying that we don't agree on many things. I think we probably do on most things, but like I'd like to welcome those conversations. So like I'm curious, this past kind of whole maelstrom of the 2020 election, Donald Trump and Joe Biden winning and all this stuff, like So where do you think politics are headed in the next, say, 5 to 10 years in this country?
Yeah, I think they're heading down the shithole. Donald Trump getting elected was the introduction to a world that we haven't seen in a very long time. Him going up against someone like Hillary, an Ivy League graduate, career politician, first lady, and having someone like Donald Trump being able to undermine her and her campaign and her rhetoric and her very people first persona. It showed I would almost want to say a dark side of the country, and also a side of the country that are assholes at the end of the day. Donald Trump's an asshole, and he let a bunch of people out who are also assholes. I guess that makes me an asshole as well, but it brought that side of the country out, and I mean, there's still assholes out there. I still see people running around with Trump signs. I mean, it was almost propaganda that was able to come out, and for the country to somehow repair itself from what just happened, and for the country to be able to finally mute these people who, for example, are still running around with Trump signs and still talking about a broken election and stolen election. It looks like the way that they're doing things is sort of like set it and forget it. Joe Biden's elected now. We don't have to worry. Everything's okay. Everything's peaceful. But it doesn't look like Donald Trump's going away. Donald Trump left a staining impression on the Republican Party, and people moving forward are going to bring that up. He has tons of supporters. I mean, that's an audience that I don't know what individual running for office for the Republican Party would forget to mention that. Those audiences aren't leaving soon. They were young, middle-aged, old. I mean, you're talking years and years and years of presidential elections before that crowd of people sort of fades away into the background.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the candidacy of Donald Trump, particularly in the 2016 race, like it exposed this underbelly of the disenfranchised and the angsty and like disillusioned, working class people. And that says a lot. I think that that's really indicative of like a lot of the problems that were never really addressed in America in terms of like, income inequality and all of these things. It's strange, but I know we've had this conversation about like capitalism versus some of the more like, I guess you could say left-leaning policies of someone like Bernie Sanders. Where do you stand on like how issues like that could be resolved within the framework of politics, if that makes sense?
So you mean like how we can either promote capitalism or promote socialism with politicians?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like that side of the American underbelly that Trump's candidacy like exposed. In your opinion, like what could be done that could potentially address some of those issues, whether it be on the Bernie Sanders kind of democratic socialist side, or whether it be on the purely capitalist system?
I think Donald Trump's campaign was attractive because his campaign wasn't run. He didn't run off of the belief that the country needs help, that we need government to sort of create policy and create a bunch of different programs for people to now sign up to, and then for people to be all set for life. Donald Trump sort of ran on a campaign where he was sort of. He gave me the impression, at least, that he was going to be very. His tax policy was going to lower everyone's taxes. Businesses were going to be able to thrive. That small businesses were going to be able to grow, and that individuals who worked probably I guess what I'm using here is individuals like commission-based individuals, construction workers who rely a lot on contracts to maintain their jobs. He relied on capitalism to truly make that system thrive. And that's more attractive to me than Bernie Sanders going on stage saying he's going to offer, I forget what the number was, like 500 federal jobs, 1,000 federal jobs, whatever it was, to boost up the economy. Donald Trump said, we're going to boost up the economy the way that the economy should be boosted up, which is by capitalism. And to me, and I think a lot of other people, it's more attractive for people to say, I made my money working hard. You make your money working hard. Versus other people saying, not everyone starts on the same foot in the race of life. Therefore, we should include little policies here and there to help people catch up and make the race more even. I know a lot of people who voted for Donald Trump who absolutely can't stand the idea of welfare and food stamps and Section 8 housing and things like that. And they constantly say, they'll probably die saying it, that I worked for my money. Everyone else should be able to work for their money as well.
Right. So yeah, it makes sense. I could easily see how that would be, the overwhelming consensus of just feeling like you've earned what it is that you have, right? As opposed to a system where it's like the resources are shared, but it's like you didn't work for it. It's more of like it's almost like a commune situation, right? Where like resources are divided and everything. I could see that. And I do myself love the idea of like, I love the idea of just working really, really hard and earning something that is really difficult to earn, but it's like you did it, you paid the price and you reap the reward, right?
Yeah.
But I wonder, because we've had this conversation before about, perhaps, for example, some of the work of like Ayn Rand, who I'm a fan of, and I think, this is probably a controversial thing to say, but I feel like I'm a fan of her as a storyteller. I don't necessarily subscribe to like her system of like organizing politics and government and all this stuff. Like, I love The Fountainhead. I think it's a great book. Like, people get mad at me for saying that, but I really just think it's a great book. I read it when I was 15. I really liked it, But yeah, in that book, she talks about how capitalism is like the single political philosophy that sort of lifted up those in poverty more than any other system. And I think it's an interesting statement, and perhaps it's true. I'm really not sure. What do you think about that?
I think that's, I don't think many people like Ayn Rand, probably for that reason. I know that, so I took a women in philosophers course, and I asked the professor, I was like, a lot of these philosophers, that the sort of philosophy they were talking about were like the large philosophies, moral philosophies in general, epistemology in general. It wasn't very targeted. But I said, why not include someone like Ayn Rand, who even though, because a lot of these philosophers, they're from, I mean, one of them was the Princess of Bohemia, so her philosophy is so outdated. And if we're introducing outdated philosophies or philosophies that have been expanded upon, why not include someone like Ayn Rand, who has contributed to the philosophy in general? And his response was sort of like, it wasn't dismissive. It was just that her philosophy her sort of contribution to philosophy is a segment of philosophy that's been taken out of philosophical studies. And it's not so much that we don't study it anymore, but that it's been replaced with, or it's been usurped by, for example, politics. That for you to introduce a philosopher that supports capitalism, that supports idealism, that you've now need to introduce someone who supports the opposite of it, and you're putting yourself in sketchy ground, and you're removing yourself from philosophical inquiry. And I think that, yeah, I also love Fountainhead. It's there's a lot of questions that stem from it that make me think, like, for example, Dominique, like, what is her role as a character?
Right.
Rourke versus Peter. What do the two say about, their job, or what do the two say about entering an industry of architecture? And one who's naturally gifted in, I guess, selling versus another who's naturally gifted in the actual trade itself. What do those two say about, us as a culture? I think that there are a lot of Peters that like to believe themselves to be Rourkes, and there are very few Rourkes at all. And and going back to sort of the whole Donald Trump thing, I think that Donald Trump makes a lot of Peters believe that they're Rourkes.
Right. Do you think that's his appeal?
I think that's his appeal. I know a lot of people who they didn't, end up. They didn't start the race on like the best foot. But I mean, like, if your father owns, say 50 multifamilies, and then you now gain those multifamilies, and then you somehow believe that, the $50,000 in income that you earn every year is somehow like you're working for it. Just, it's not exactly the same as someone who builds up the real estate empire.
Sure. It's so interesting. I feel like it's easier for me to like reflect on the character of someone like Donald Trump now that just the maelstrom of his presidency is sort of like in the rear view, But he really is he's like a character out of King Lear. He's like he's a Shakespearean character, It's wild.
It's actually funny that you said. I actually just had to write a report about King Lear.
Wow.
Yeah, it's funny that you said that. But it's actually interesting, that connection, because I never actually thought about Donald Trump as King Lear, even though they're actually quite similar.
Right.
Especially where King Lear, I guess the behavior of King Lear, which was very like egotistical, egocentric, here, I'll give you all of this stuff, but like, love me though, please.
Right.
Oh, you don't love me? Okay, I want my stuff back.
Yeah.
And I think Donald Trump actually fits that archetype quite well.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Have you ever seen that documentary on Netflix? I think it's called An American Life by, or no, maybe it's something else. It's like a documentary charting the life of Donald Trump up until the presidency. I forget what it's called. It might just be the.
Sorry, I don't think so. But I think I've seen something about like some sort of documentary about like his dad. I don't know if it was on Netflix. I think it was on YouTube or something like that.
Okay, it might have been the same one. I'm not sure, but like this Netflix documentary about Trump is really revealing in as far as like showing what drives him, like scars from childhood trauma, like leading to this insecurity and leading to this kind of this sort of wound in which he tries to push down, and by pushing down, he's putting up this false front, right, and being this like ultra, alpha male kind of thing. It's interesting, and sadly, even Mary Trump's book, which I read and loved, I related to Donald Trump in a lot of ways, which kind of scared me. But like, at least the beginning, I relate to some of the scars that were talked about. But yeah, hopefully I don't start a real estate, empire and then run for president and do all that. But yeah, does that sort of make sense? Like, do you think something like that can be the impetus for this larger than life Shakespearean, kind of character?
So like, I think I know what you're talking about. Like Donald Trump's dad was kind of like abusive, sort of, and he was very like tough.
A bit. I mean, yeah, I think my recollection of Mary Trump's book was sort of that, he was never really interested in just being, father. It was more like, he had his 18-hour day, work day, and then whatever few, hours he had to spend with his children, it was more like, it was just like it was done out of like obligation more than anything else, like,
Gotcha.
oh yeah, I have kids, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah, I know that. Oh yeah. I think I know what you're talking about now. I think Mary Trump talks about it in the beginning where she says like Donald Trump competed for his dad's love.
Yes.
And yeah, I think an interesting part of that is I'm trying to think about who the philosopher is, but and I can't think about the name. But anyways, the philosopher said something along the lines of, be careful when you're battling monsters not to become a monster yourself.
Yeah, I just saw that quote. I love it.
Yeah, or even I can't think about this philosopher's name either, who said, when you stare into the abyss stares back onto you.
Right.
And sort of both kind of take away this belief or this sort of strange like alter ego, which replaces like. For example, you see an issue that you were raised that existed when you were being raised, or when you were here, or when you were there, and then in turn reflect that into your behavior as just a means of trying to defeat it yourself. I think that for Donald Trump, I think it's tough to see that in Donald Trump's like public persona.
Right.
Looking at him like on stage against Hillary and things like that, I think maybe that it's tough to make an argument that's the case. But I do sort of see one instance where, and we've talked about this for sure, where Donald Trump brought the victims from Bill Clinton, one of the debates, and I think that's sort of like that last desperation, the ability to pull the rug under someone's feet. Or the ability to say rather, like, okay, I may have tried to grab someone by the pussy, but this person actually did do it.
Right.
Is sort of like, okay, I did something bad, but he did something worse. Which reminds me of like literally like a kiddish. It's like something a kid would say, and that's definitely connects with King Lear for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sorry, to go ahead.
But I think that Donald Trump's sort of his effort to his past. Imagine there's a Native American tradition that I absolutely love. It's and I think that there's some psychological studies which sort of support the logic behind it, not to the extent that they actually do it, but a little bit of it. That there's sort of a necessary role in a family that, and this might not be seen too positively, but that there's a necessary role where, the mom archetypally is very comforting. The father is sort of more brute, I guess, and is meant to teach the children sort of the outside world, where the mother is able to comfort sort of some of these outer world issues, and in early infancy, these inner world issues, just trying to experience certain things, learning what's hot, what's cold, falling, getting up, balancing. And this is more of a psychoanalysis of certain literatures. Maybe like the Bible, for example, is very patriarchal, and it represents the father and the mother very well.
Sure.
But in Native American times, they would take the son of the family, and up to a certain age, the son would stay at home for the most part, and occasionally leave the house. And the father would show it like hunting tricks or whatever. And at a certain point in the middle of the night, the dad would kidnap the son with the other people in the village, the other males in the village. They'd tie him up, they'd do a ritual, and then they'd bring him in the middle of the woods, and they'd force him to spend about a week there and come back. If he died, then fate had it that he wasn't man enough to come back into the village, or he wasn't eligible to be a part of the tribe.
Damn.
And not only that, but it dictates a certain spot in life where the dad is responsible not only for showing certain paths and giving some sort of feedback, some sort of information loop, and reward loop for certain behaviors, but also putting it to the test. And I think that for Donald Trump, and I'm not a psychologist, so I don't know why I'm going down this road, but for Donald Trump, I can see it. For anyone who fights for, in childhood, I think it's natural to battle for attention.
Yeah.
For you not to get the recognition, the proper recognition, and the proper reward systems, and all of that the sort of desperation. Or not desperation, I guess the word I'm looking for is more so the competition, the competitiveness is something that thrives in Donald Trump thoroughly, especially in his debates, where he was way less political, naturally political. He was very he was grappling with Hillary essentially.
Yeah.
And even Joe Biden.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's interesting that you say that, because I remember years ago I read an autobiography from Richard Branson, and he talks about when he was very young, his mother, like, they were driving home from getting groceries, I believe, and she literally stopped in the middle of nowhere and let him out of the car and was like, "Okay, we're 4 miles away. Find your way back home." And she shut the door and she drove home. And he, according to the book, who knows how much of this is real or not, but like, he did find his way back home eventually. And her reaction was just like, "Oh, wasn't that fun? Okay, now help me make dinner." So, in a way, like, I wouldn't recommend that, but it's hard to say that didn't have something to do with his like entrepreneurial spirit and his like ambition and how far he's willing to push certain creative endeavors,
Yeah.
It's an interesting question. I don't know.
There's a story that reminds me of this. So I think my girlfriend's dad would appreciate this story. So he was, I think he was 8 years old at the time when this happened. He had to take care of his cows, and he had to take care of like the farm and stuff like that. And so at 8 years old, he would have to wake up at like 5 a.m, and he'd have to walk down to the farm, and he'd have to, let the cows out and bring them into the woods and to different pastures and so on. And he tells the story that, one day he had to go to the farm, and it was early in the morning, and he took this route that was a lot quicker than going the main roadway, because it just took far too long. And I guess he was running a little bit late that day, so he was double speed. And walking in this wooded trail, he finds like what looks to be a hand coming out of the woods and waving him in.
Whoa.
And as an 8-year-old, his reaction was like, I should run. And then at the same time, though, he was like, if I run back home, then I'm going to get beat. But if I run forward, I'm going to get grabbed by this hand. So he stood there for like, I mean, I think it was somewhere along the lines of like 15, 20 minutes, like contemplating, should I run back home? Should I approach the hand? What do I do? And ultimately, he waited until the sun rose high enough for him to see that it was just like a stick with leaves and it was blowing because the wind. But that's a similar battle though, where you're faced at this frontier of, I mean, almost essentially. I mean, I don't want to say adulthood because he was 8, but it shows something that underlines all of this, which is that you don't really have a second option, and that you're
Right.
forced not only to face the repercussions of either decision that you make, but that you're the one that's responsible for making this decision, that you're not going to have someone there giving you the decision yourself. And the guy, I mean, he's also a very successful businessman. He's also a very hard worker, and he has a lot of drive. And I think
Yeah.
exactly what you said, that instances like these definitely fuel that sort of that drive and push to want more and to do more.
Yeah. It's almost like this reminds me of a conversation that Rogan had on his podcast with a guest. And I think it was about this idea of like, him speaking about his own family and his kids. He's saying, as a father, I try to do everything I can to shield my kids from like, a difficult life. But he's like, I also know all of the interesting overachievers that I know, all my friends, they come from like broken families and like crazy backstories and like, almost insurmountable difficulties and challenges. And he's like,
Yeah.
that's what makes them awesome. That's what makes them interesting. So it's a weird balance where it's like, yeah, you want to provide, I don't want to say an easy life, but you want to provide, some level of comfort. But on the other hand, it's like the challenge is also what seems to make people like, it builds character, I think, and it makes people understand early on that like, wow, I have to really work for it if I want it, So it's a weird dichotomy,
I can't imagine, I being 8 years old and running around with cows in the woods.
Right.
He said that one time he faced like, I think he was probably pushed a little rough. I think that back in the day they were a little bit crazy about it. He was pushed a little, I think, not too much, but he was definitely pushed. Like one day he was in the woods. He was also 8 years old, and it was raining. It was like a terrible thunderstorm, and he was just like, he was leaning up against this tree, like crying, while all these cows are just like sort of walking around him and
Wow.
making a mess in the dirt and stuff. But yeah, there's an interesting point that I've always like really wondered. It's like there's locally, and I think I can think of a lot of examples. It's just empirical evidence, but anyways, there's people who have been more successful than others, and I think like their success was not only more successful, but like they were able to push themselves out of poverty to, I mean, top. I sort of want to say like the upper class,
Right.
And their little empires that they create totally fall and become ruined when it comes time to pass their empires on to the next generation.
Yes.
And very wealthy people that have a lot of old money, this does not happen to them.
Wow.
And I don't think it's something that's hereditary or it's something that's biologically ingrained in these in like, for example, the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers. I couldn't think of who it was, but the Rockefellers. I think that there's obviously something that they're doing that's not making it exactly, easy for them to ruin their family, their monetary tradition. But a lot of these people, they're not doing something right, in my opinion, and they lose everything they've worked for. That their families just their family success just fades away.
Right.
And I think it has a lot to do with what you're saying, that a lot of people who are born in struggle, they don't want to provide, they don't want to make their children struggle as much, which is why they worked for everything. But at the same time, they're reducing the probability that their child will be able to successfully carry over the torch and achieve even more than they did without the same experiences.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's perfectly said, man. And I even, it's weird. I have a weird perspective just because I've always been someone who's always been like repulsed by the idea of nepotism. And I champion the individual and people who kind of work as hard as they can to sort of, just achieve through their work what others who aren't willing to do the work will never do, right? But at the same time, it's been weird because I've seen instances of like creatives and musicians and stuff like this, and their kids, even though they might not have the same drive, it's like by virtue of the fact that they've been exposed to that world and entertainment and creativity from the beginning of their lives, it's like they're perfectly suited for that life in a way that other people probably can't be, So it's weird. It's like I still am not a fan of the concept of nepotism, but then I see instances where I'm like, wow, I mean, that person seems to be just suited for this,
Yeah.
So it's very confusing.
I think it kind of comes from it kind of points back to conservatism in general. That for you to be sort of conservative in nature, you kind of have to be, I mean, if you go through these struggles and you witness everything and you're sort of taken into the woods, you have your own, woodsy experience, and you have to deal with the cows at 8 a.m. or at 5 a.m., whatever it is. I think it's hard for you then to go on and say like that certain things, like giving these things to people or whatever the things may be, is something that's okay, knowing that like you were waking up at 5 a.m. taking care of cows and you didn't have an option to go back and where a lot of these people, they have the option to go back and they choose to go back. That to me also stems from like, I don't want to go on a tangent, but if we think about like conservatism, and I'm talking like the actual philosophical school of conservatism, it changes when we think about it politically. Like conservatives historically, so for example, Thomas Hobbes was the sort of like the founding father of like conservatism back in the day, and his belief was that humans were corruptible. And now, if you think about this currently, and stemming from his philosophy rather, the corruptible humans needed government because government was the way of preventing corruption from spreading, throughout the country, and government's job was to be very involved, etc. Nowadays, though, that definition sort of changes, and conservatives prefer less government. They believe sort of that humans aren't as corruptible and humans deserve more rights and so on. And I think that when you have an instance of, for example, working for something as hard as people do for their dreams and their goals and their ambitions, that it's sort of a slap in the face for people to then be gifted the position that you yourself worked so hard for. Now, whether that's financial freedom or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But I imagine it would be a slap in the face if, for example, you and person X were both battling for a contract. You were rejected for the musical contract. They were accepted, and coincidentally, their dad is the CEO of that record company.
Right.
That would be probably disheartening. Now, if they worked, for example, out of the 24 days and 24 hours in a day, they worked, 23 hours, and you worked only, 1 hour out of the 23 days, well, then the argument would change a little bit. But,
Yeah, in their favor for sure.
yeah, yeah. And I, I think that it's tough to, I think nowadays, especially, especially with this whole political thing as well, that conservatism in general is being thrown out, and it's sort of being attacked. Like, I don't want to. It's sort of being attacked in the sense that if you're a conservative, you're now associated with a bunch of other different arbitrary characteristics that don't necessarily have to exist.
Right.
Um, and it kind of, I think, I mean, I was a big fan of Bernie Sanders for a while, and I still kind of am. I wish he would have went farther in the election, but
Sure.
but for Bernie Sanders to go on stage and to say like he wants to do free healthcare when there's tons of people who are paying insane amounts for healthcare, for Bernie Sanders to go on stage and to say that he's going to place however many federal jobs when there's people who battled for certain positions.
Yeah.
A lot of these things, I think, especially to these people who have these 5 a.m. experiences, that becomes very distasteful very, very quickly when you see a
Right.
lot of young kids who haven't had these experiences, and young kids, or even middle-aged people who haven't had these experiences, rooting for this guy. I don't think that that's very attractive to someone who was up at 5 a.m. taking care of cows. I'm not speaking for my girlfriend's dad, but I see, I sort of connect it where I'm like, okay, I'm taking care of this cow, and this guy doesn't have to take care of his cow. You know what I mean? Something along the lines of that going on in the Azores.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. I guess the fundamental like question comes down to like the Bernie Sanders argument and his candidacy and all that. I feel like it's just it seems to be like the question of should we rewrite the rules, right? Like, is it fair that you should have to pay all this money to go get an education at a university anywhere in the country? Should you have to pay to be, to be covered in case something health wise happens to you that's serious and you need all these things? Yeah, and you raise a lot of good points. I'm not sure that someone like Bernie Sanders, unfortunately, could ever really win the presidency. Perhaps someone like AOC in the future, because I think the tide culturally seems to be turning a bit. Perhaps she has a shot. And I like her. I think she probably, I would vote for her if she ran, but,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I don't know. Do you think it's possible someone like that could win?
I think AOC scares me a little bit.
She does?
She's Yeah, she's a little, I think, too. So I think the district that she represents in New York is like super 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 blue, and it's one of like the rare districts that I might be mistaken it for someone else, but I'm almost positive that it's her. That her district is very very liberal, and the issue that I have is that I don't think that throughout the United States, like try convincing, for example, like rural Oklahoma that that free college is good when kids are probably being raised on farms and things like that. Like I just don't see how some of her policies, like I I guess what I'm trying to say here is that like DeSantis just came out and said that a lot of policies that are coming out of the White House are in favor for blue states, and they sort of hurt red states.
Right.
And although those that he's like, I guess he's sort of politicized, and there might be other motivations to that. Maybe he plans on running for president and he wants to rally up Florida, whatever it is.
Sure.
Someone like AOC, I don't think would be very beneficial to the country as a whole, since a lot of her beliefs are so, I don't want to say one-sided, but very, very liberal. And there are
Right.
many places in America where hardcore liberalism, at least in the political sense, I don't think would be helpful.
You know, yeah, it's interesting that you say that because with the 2020 election playing out the way it did, and Joe Biden, winning the nomination and then the presidency, and particularly on election night, where it was showing like the electoral map, right? It was showing like
Mm,
geographically all of the states and their electoral kind of the tally and who was ahead and all this.
mm,
It was the first time I felt something close to what I would call like empathy for the DNC, because it's exactly what you just said. Like, I was looking at these places like, Arkansas and Florida and like Colorado and all these places, and I'm thinking like, if Bernie Sanders were the Democratic nominee, how well would he do in these places, right? In these swing states. And I start thinking like, shit, I love him. I mean, I'd like to think that he would have won. Maybe he would have, but I don't know, man. It seems like a lot tougher of a sell. So I kind of get it. I
yeah,
get why Biden was the guy.
yeah. There was
I just saw him.
there was I, I really don't understand. I mean, it seems like there had to be corruption for Bernie Sanders to not win the nomination.
Yeah.
Um, but I think, and we've talked about this too, that like Bernie Sanders, by naming himself a democratic socialist, he automatically loses. He's automatically, you can't market to certain crowds.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that, especially during COVID, and with the economy which that's a whole other thing. This whole economy, like what happened during COVID. But I think someone like Bernie Sanders, I think during something like COVID, that you kind of need a Bernie Sanders
Yeah.
um, to really get him get the economy back into working order.
Yeah.
But
Eh,
but at the same time, though, um, there was I just don't I was I have to investigate this a little bit further because there's a lot of conspiracy theories. But the fact that COVID cases dropped 50%, like a week after Joe Biden was elected,
mm,
and there's no real correlative proof that there was any change in human behavior during the week before it was reported the COVID cases dropped.
yeah.
It makes me think things are a little bit fishy. It makes me think things are a little bit fishy.
It wouldn't be the craziest thing I've ever heard, that's for sure. I feel like, I mean, yeah, there's some strange activity going on around like him being snubbed for the nomination. Like,
Mm,
I don't know. I do think the DNC conspired, and they met with the candidates, and they convinced them to drop out and endorse Biden, which worked, you know. I don't know. And that makes me not like them, but I guess I have a
yeah,
sympathy because I do like a lot of what Biden has been doing as president, and yeah, hopefully Bernie is there to sort of nudge him in the right direction when needed.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Did you hear this new report that Meghan Markle is considering running in 2024?
No, I didn't.
You didn't? Oh, and Trump actually responded to it, and he said, "I hope she does because then I'll probably run as well."
Oh God.
Man, I don't know. Do you think Meghan would do well if she ran?
I mean, there's always a crowd. There's always going to be a crowd of people to rally behind these people.
Yeah.
But I hope and I pray that there's enough Americans to see through sort of insincerity. I
Right.
think at this point Donald Trump is insincere. I think that it's almost fair to say that Donald Trump's insincere.
Yeah.
We've had him in office. We've seen what he's done, and that's not to say that everything he's done is bad. But obviously, and taking into account, other instances, yeah, he didn't really, even if he indirectly does so, even if he indirectly divides the country, right? Maybe not him doing things to, ruin the country. Even if, for example, even if the news is 100% propaganda and the news makes up its own shit and things like that, uh, having Donald Trump in office again, I mean, I don't even want to know what would happen. There would have to be some sort of like revolution. There would have to be some sort of revolution.
Yeah.
And if you put it so that you have Donald Trump versus Merkel, have I mean a battle of you'll have another situation with Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. You know, who's the lesser of two evils is what I
Yes.
think. Is what I think.
I would agree with that. I would agree. But it's so crazy to me that like I mean all this I don't know if it's accurate or not, but all this rhetoric about him starting a third party called the Patriot Party,
Mm.
and kind of like distancing themselves from the GOP and kind of doing their own thing. That sort of worries me a little bit because that does sort of remind me of like, the Nazi movement in the 30s in
Yep.
Germany. Yeah, I mean, but I don't know. I'm not comparing Trump to Hitler. I think, I think that's an unfair comparison. But
Yeah.
I don't know. He's a little unhinged. I think it's safe to say a
Yeah.
little bit, a little bit. But yeah, I just don't know. What about Ivanka? Do you think Ivanka has a shot at running as a
I
Republican?
actually I actually like Ivanka a little bit.
I
I
do. I
think
do
that
too.
she's very, very intelligent, and she's very, very like she's a woman, so automatically someone's going to vote. Some people are going to rally behind her. The Republican Party needs to have some sort of needs to have more women who are less sketchy. There was one woman who ran for the Republican Party, and I mean she was thoroughly sketchy, and she was actually a part of like a financial scandal not that long ago.
Right.
And I think, yeah, I think I would, if Ivanka ran, I mean, I would like to see what her policies are. Hopefully, it's not like a copy and paste of Donald Trump,
Right.
but I think she could do well. I mean, there's the Republican Party at some point has to do something and update its policies, with climate change and they need to get more women supporters because how long can they really be going on like direct opposites of the Democratic Party. Like climate change is real. No, climate change is false. Like they have to update these policies. It's getting old. It's outdated, and it's pointless at this. Something needs to happen. Ivanka 2024 at this point.
I agree, man, and I think like we've talked about this before, but if there was a sensible, rational Republican candidate who was serious about climate change, it would not take very much for them to have my support. Honestly, that in and of itself, even if their character was kind of repulsive, I would
Mm,
still consider it because that's really the main issue. It's just like, to me, the climate issue is like, it's the major existential threat to civilization and humanity. And for a major political party in the world's greatest superpower to like systematically deny it and consistently over decades, like that's kind of the deal breaker for me. But I completely agree with what you're saying. I think it's going to take some kind of rebranding, for them to be relevant. Well, I guess they are relevant, but I just mean like for them to be an equal, I
mm.
suppose, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that between climate change and Russia, China, and Iran, uh, that'll shape how our politics move in the next maybe in a couple of years. I think actually that
Yeah.
will I don't there's no candidate right now who both or who altogether satisfies climate change and the Russia, China, Iran conflict. There's no candidate that's really, okay, we're going to fight climate change, and also we're also going to have a strict policy against Russia, China, and Iran. And even though it's not like, I'm not saying that you need to have a strict policy against Russia, China, and Iran, but at the end of the day, I think we're moving towards a path of like of a terrible Cold War and China is not slowly, but like quickly becoming the world's next superpower. And
Yeah.
if the U.S. wants to be someone else's bitch, that's fine. Uh, there's nothing we can do. All empires fall,
Right.
but I assume that most people don't want that to happen. And I think that's probably one of the major things that I liked about Donald Trump. He was an asshole, and you need an asshole against an asshole, and so that was good.
Yeah, well, do you know, like in the beginning of that whole thing with the U.S. and North Korea, when Kim Jong Un was threatening the U.S., and Trump started calling Kim Jong Un like Little Rocket Man, and saying like you better remember I have a button on my desk too, and this one actually works, shit like that. I think there's something to that, even though it's horrifying and it's
Yeah.
really, really like, it's not fun for everyone else. But I feel like there's something about that where that probably did shut Kim Jong Un up a little bit, you know, because he's probably like, this crazy motherfucker is saying the shit, and what do you say to that when the president of the United States is talking shit to you over Twitter? Like, I don't know. I don't remember any Democrats having that kind of courage, I guess you could call it. I'm not sure what you'd call it.
I kind of and those are the things that I you sort of need once in a while. I mean, not to go on Twitter and say that, but
Yeah.
but I mean, China is literally overthrowing everything. The U.S. is cool, we have bases everywhere, and essentially it's like the contemporary version of colonization. You put your seat in every one of these countries.
Right.
But China, and I think it's 2042. I think they plan on being like their goal is to be the world's superpower.
Right.
You kind of need someone who's not only willing to point out the whole situation for what it is,
Sure.
and you need someone who's also willing to not. They need to market it. I think it's Joe Biden isn't marketing it, but he knows very well. I think that based on his actions, not responding to Beijing before the G20 or whatever the summit that was coming up, I think that his actions show that there's a conflict between the U.S. and China, but it's going under the radar. I think that that's probably an economy thing, that they don't want the economy to to get worried about a Cold War or a war or anything like that. But the conflict is going to exist, and it's just going to get worse and worse. So I think Donald Trump, in that sense, did a good job challenging Chinese products. And I'll be honest with you, I don't know all the things that he did when it came to the conflict with China, but he marketed it, and sadly his followers took it as like damn Chinese and things like that.
Sure.
But they made it known that there's a conflict between the U.S. and China, that the conflict is getting worse, and that action needs to be done against that. And
Right.
even him showing it, it's I'm not going to say it's better. It's not diplomatic, but it's sort of like reassuring, I guess.
Sure. Well, I think there's merit there for sure, but it's so confusing when, like, for some reason recently, like, I've been very inspired by like political memoirs and past presidents of the U.S. And I was reading Barack Obama's new memoir, and there was this moment where he's describing his experience at a G20 summit, and he's trying to rally China to get behind some kind of plan. I guess this was the beginning of the Paris Climate Accord, and just who knows how much of this is like 100% accurate, but just his chronicling of that experience and like the responses he would get from the diplomats of China and Chinese government officials, like, and how difficult it was to do anything rallying all these countries on climate change, gave me a sense of like, I mean, it must be so difficult to push someone like China, because they do control how much of the distribution of like medicine, for example, or products in general, right? China is like they're already sort of a global superpower in that sense.
For sure.
So it's so confusing. Like, if someone were to be president, it's like, even if they had the things in mind that you mentioned, how do you diplomatically address those situations without making a fierce enemy? It's a very strange line to walk. What are your thoughts on that?
At this point, I don't know if you can like be friends with China. I mean, I don't know. I that's something that's like, for you to have all the information going on, like, for example, the recent string of attacks, cyber attacks on the U.S. from Russia, China, Iran, who knows, their influence on the 2020, the 2016, and then the 2020 election, 2014. I'm sorry, was it 2016? Yeah, 2016.
Yeah.
their influence on the election, their influence on social media, their influence everywhere. How I don't know how you sort of like you now sit at the same table as them, and you ask them like, how's everything going? You want to go ahead and you want to sign this paper for me? Maybe we can work together and things like that. I
Right.
think there's no and obviously like the U.S. is doing the same thing in China. The U.S. must have their hands in the Hong Kong protest. They must be, they contributing somehow. There's no evidence that the U.S. isn't, and I don't think anyone believes that the U.S. isn't.
Right.
So it's like they're making like petty remarks on Twitter without like tagging the individual is really what's going on. And then like cooperation. I don't know if cooperation really exists, and it already seems like China is able to. There was a book that came out, and the book was about the conflict, and it came out a while ago, and the book talked about how if the best strategy for China to undo, or BRICS for that matter, for all the BRICS, I think is Brazil, Russia, China, Iran, and for them to overthrow American power, they have to start by breaking the weakest link, most likely Europe in general, which now seems like a perfect time, or not now, but like a little while ago seems like a perfect time. And now you have the results of France now saying that they're not going to be a part of the U.S.'s containment policy and that they want to grow alongside of China.
Right.
So, right off the bat, that tells me that China's probably rewarding France somehow. They have some sort of agreement. China never, I mean, a part of working in China is giving up your information.
Right.
And, so that obviously means France is probably, it's you scratch my back, I scratch your back. France must be giving up something in exchange for something.
Sure.
And that's going to be a result, I think, happening fairly quickly. What's the benefit of working with the U.S. when, China has a better deal on the table? China's growing very, very quickly. China's industries are, I mean, in the U.S., we already have an issue where, I mean, if you look at our trade jobs, I mean, even, just going off my own experiences, graduating from a trade school, there was like 5 kids in total that actually decided they were going to stay in the trade. This is a school that's meant to produce tradesmen,
Wow.
and no one really wanted it. I mean, a couple of people did, but not many, and you look at like the job market for construction, you're facing people who are either rejected from their ideal industries, or people who are career tradesmen, but you find very, very few young people. Very few. It's not like you put a posting on Handshake or on jobs.com, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden you have a bunch of young kids applying for your job. You just don't find it. It's like there's a huge problem coming up. China does not have this problem. They have plenty of workers and plenty of laborers. And I mean, they were able to build like a hospital in like a week or something like that. I mean, you try and hire a contractor in the U.S. to do that. They probably could. You'll probably find a contractor to do it. But damn, they're going to be like all 80. I mean, Uncle Louie is probably like the average age of a contractor in the U.S.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. And with the rise of like artificial intelligence and automation, who knows how many of these jobs are even going to be a thing in the future, right?
Yeah.
Like that's a scary impending situation as well. I mean, I don't know. I don't know. It's hard to say, man. I think the next 10 to 20 years are going to be very, very interesting, politically,
Yeah.
philosophically, culturally. What's your best thought on the impact that AI will have in the next 10 to 20 years, just in general?
Wow. I don't even know where to start. AI, in my opinion, I think AI is really, really cool on multiple fronts. Legally, AI is offering insight into judgments that that we as individuals aren't able to really identify. How judgments tend to lean. Can certain characteristics be linked with with how well the individual will react to certain repercussions, jail time, public service, etc. AI is opening up many fronts in medicine, whatever, nearly everything. But I think that there is a bad frontier of there's a little bit of like a tsunami coming there, that there are a lot of people in the U.S. who I don't believe. I mean, if you think about um, the average, just financially, the average savings account in America, I think it's less than 1,000. And so, if you look back at any sort of industrial revolution, you not only make massive displacement, uh, but you also force job markets to become eradicated like instantaneously. AI in that instance is in this case is doing the same thing. In China, you can see that people are more willing to uh, not jump around, but there's plenty of workers for whatever the job may be, whether it's repairman for the AI or machines or whatever it is. In the
Sure.
U.S., though, I don't think we have the same adjustment. In China, they're willing to use any form of AI with less regulation than in the U.S. In the U.S., I think that we're taking a slower approach to introducing AI. Um, at the end of the day, it's like an arms race. The first person to have AI that's able to do the most is the one that's going to be the most successful.
Yeah.
Off the bat, China, Russia, these are all countries that are outperforming the U.S. in a couple of fronts. And in the U.S., we're still stuck on things that, um, that we can't solve. We have a student loan crisis. We have, until we're not even able to get past like these issues where China would just like, okay, there's an issue. All right, be quiet, arrest that person, kill that person, all
Yeah.
right. And now let's focus on AI. In the US though, we have other things we got to worry about before and they're not petty problems, but in China, they're petty problems.
Right.
In the US though, worrying about AI is probably something that's just going to that's just going to walk up to the doorstep and come right in. Whereas in China, I think they have a better plan for it. To me, my personal opinion is that AI is sort of like the inevitable change of power. And even though AI is cool and stuff like that, I mean, new stuff kind of is a little bit worrisome, and something as new as AI. I mean, there's one thing that gives me hope. I forget the philosopher's name. The philosopher there was argument that whether or not a lot of philosophers argue whether or not AI is intelligent or is conscious. If you turn on a computer, is your computer conscious? And this philosopher says that we have no evidence to know that AI is conscious, but we have all the evidence to know that biology and human beings and creatures are some sort of intelligent, and humans are conscious. And we know that AI with the assistance of humans can contribute to conscious systems. And he said there should be no worry about whether or not AI is conscious because we already have the technology to make conscious beings more intelligent than us. And we can alter biology in ways that we really don't know what the effects would be. For example, like the mRNA vaccine.
Right.
The fact that Moderna was able to produce a vaccine, which would have taken years and years if we were to use old technology, we're talking about AI being able to extract DNA, mRNA in this case, replicate it into vaccines and mass produce it across the country and throughout the world.
Yeah.
So I don't think, to me, the worry about AI is it'll displace job markets, but the major worry is on I think the future of biology. My friend's actually I think he's applying. I don't know if he applied or if he got accepted, but he applied to MIT to become a bioengineer.
Wow.
And sort of one of the things that he had to do was this little research paper about a topic of his choosing. He chose to write about bacteria logic gates, I think, and how you can take bacteria and you can run logical. You can, I guess, program them somehow for logical equations, sort of like Excel. I guess like an alive Excel sheet,
Wow.
and the bacteria will make decisions based on your logical setup. And it's only a matter of time, especially with the CRISPR babies that just happened not that long ago, which I think like the side effect they say is intelligence, an
That's
accidental side
horrifying.
effect, of course.
That's horrifying.
But yeah, I mean, it's like AI to me is a worry, but it's more so like biological engineering. It's like a matter of time before they're able to do it. I think you said that China had made a brain or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, this was years ago in that documentary, The Transcendent Man. There was the Chinese government had commissioned a U.S. scientist to build an artificial brain, and as far as I remember from the documentary, he was well on his way to doing it, and this was years ago. So I don't know, I don't know what the progress has been on that, but that's pretty scary. I guess it was an effort to understand the origin of consciousness,
Mm,
which is pretty wild to think that anyone is really researching that and actually making progress is wild. But
yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it's a new frontier. It's pretty it's hopeful, but in a way, I think it's like all new things, like you say, it's it's a little disconcerting in some ways. But I do have hope that it can be a tool for really lasting positive change.
Yeah.
You know, any thoughts on like positive applications of AI?
Um, I guess like real life experiencing of Terminator would be a positive for us to have our own Arnold Schwarzenegger come out of the from or wait no he comes from the future into the past. So I guess if we could
Yeah.
have that happen, that would be cool. I think
Damn.
that I guess the benefit to AI right now, like the largest benefit is this its stability in space. Obviously, AI is like Elon Musk's focus on AI and how it's going to be, uh, for example, Neuralink, or even I think it's a Starlink or the
Y-
satellites,
Yeah. Is this Starlink? It sounds right.
but all of it run off AI, and AI is able to somehow manage the satellites so that they have perfect alignment, and that they're able to hit perfect spots, that you can now manage all these satellites. So like for him to be, and also not even that, but the fact that you have things like the new rover that just landed on Mars, and all of that technology. The future that we say right now is that we can see right now is obviously space travel, and I think AI is the frontier to accessing all of that. That I think is the largest benefit, and the
Yeah.
crazy shit that they're gonna do on in space and on Mars and stuff like that.
Yeah. You know, I never heard it framed that way. That's a really interesting way to say it because I think you're right. I think artificial intelligence is the key to interstellar travel and all of these things that we're trying to do that are science fiction right now. Like I know we are talking the other day about the Dyson sphere and all these things that
Mm,
are their scientific theory about how we can warp space and time and how potentially time travel and resurrection are
yeah.
theoretically possible. But yeah, I think AI is definitely the component for that. So that's a really interesting point. Do you think it's going to be like the AI themselves coming up with these new techniques and new kind of applications of technology, and it's going to be like autonomous in a sense that we hand over control to decision making to this artificial intelligence? Do you think there's going to be that scenario?
I think that I don't think that AI is that. Even at its max, if AI can actually like discover frontiers and understand that it's a frontier, I don't
Yeah.
think that that's actually possible. Um, if you look at it, if so, they call it the Chinese room. I'm sorry, not the Chinese. No, it is the Chinese room problem, where if you put a person in a room and you send into the room Chinese language, then they're an English speaker. Will they understand? I'm sorry. Let me make sure that I get this right. You put them into a room. You send Chinese symbols with American translation. Will they understand the Chinese language, or will they only be able to associate English words with certain Chinese symbols? They use that pretty much as like the thought experiment to whether or not computers will be intelligent. And I don't think that the computers will ever be able to discover new sort of. I don't think computers will ever be able to understand something as well as, for example, the Chinese language as a Chinese speaker. So even if a computer is able to discover something new, for example, like a new mathematical proof, I don't know if the computer itself is able to identify this as like a new mathematical proof.
Right.
I think that at that point you'd need intervention from a human to say like, oh, wait a second, this is what this is. But in if you could go into a mind of a computer, if they have them, it would be that 1001000, and they wouldn't actually know that this is something that's new to the frontier of science. And to that extent,
Right.
I think that it wouldn't work. But I do think that they'd be able to program rocket ships or rovers and things like that, so that the rovers are able, which they already do,
Right.
so that the robots are able to do a certain task, withstand certain obstacles via programming, and also make decisions based on human decisions. Ultimately, will they be able to know, like, oh, I'm on trajectory to landing in Mars, but I'm going to turn around and I'm going to go, to another planet instead. I don't know if
Right.
that would be the case for them to think by themselves and be able to do that.
Sure. So what you're talking about, I think, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but is the idea of consciousness, right? Like having the autonomy, the self autonomy to be able to say, like, this, for example, with relation to the Chinese language, like this phrase means this, right? It has a meaning that's not only like the set of words themselves are a certain way of communication, but there are things like cultural context and phrases and kinds of
Yep.
nuances and depths that the computer without consciousness would not be able to replicate.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I
The
wonder.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say I wonder if consciousness will ever be, be able to be replicated or created within the context of a machine.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that even if they could, um, like I know that. So there was like one experiment, I think, that they tried to. I think it was a focus group off of the AlphaGo, Google's automated Go player, the game Go.
Yeah.
Um, they uh, they created the system, and then they played the system against itself, so that it was not playing against the best human, but it was playing against the best AI, which beat the best human.
Right.
Um, and they linked a similar system to language, and they had the computer communicate with another computer. Eventually, the two computers, they created their own language, assumingly because a lot of the cultural attachments to words, they didn't exist. There was no need to use them. The computer created its own language, and although there was a logic to it, as there is for all languages, there was no scientists that were viewing the computers and recording their talks. They weren't able to decipher it at the time. I don't know if they have now, but at the time they weren't able to decipher the language, and they had to shut down the program. And I think that points to the fact that even if computers were conscious, that we wouldn't be able to identify it. It would be something, and we're programmed a certain way. Computers are programmed a certain way. There's some sort of similarities, but they're not exactly identical. So being able to see how a computer would be conscious would be a task that I don't know if we'd actually be able to do.
Yeah, that's an interesting point too. It's almost like being able to diagnose consciousness. There's so many.
Yeah.
I mean, if something is replicating the outcome of consciousness, that's not quite consciousness. So,
Right.
Yeah, that's a very interesting like philosophical question. But damn, I mean, I feel like I could talk about this stuff with you all day, and I definitely could. Actually, I could, but I know you're busy, and I just want to say thank you again for doing this. I think that's an inspiring, little scary, but an inspiring note to end on with the possibilities of the future. But yeah, man, I just want to say thank you, and this was a blast. I hope you had fun,
I,
and I'd love to have you back on if you'd like to come back on.
of course, of course.
Awesome, man. Well, thank you again. Be safe. Yeah, watch out for those robots. They'll get you.